What's up everyone? In this video, I'm going to talk about some strange things that happen during the tide cycles, which can make the chart seem very inaccurate. And then once we better understand these anomalies, I'm going to show you how to plan for a successful fishing trip, even when the environment doesn't seem to match the chart. So there are many different ways that the tide can seem off, so to speak. Many different things that happen during the tide, depending on your location, that can make it seem like the chart is completely inaccurate. So I'm going to cover two of them that I commonly fish, once I get the right marker. So let's say we have like an island here, and we're fishing a river system. We have land on this side. We have This is where the two rivers merge, in other words. And then we have maybe a thinner strip of water on this side that comes in from the ocean just like that one. They meet here and go forward. And then, let's say here, upriver a little ways, we have our back bay. So the first one that I actually came across when I first started fishing, it kind of threw me for a loop, but I understood it because I was fishing through enough of the tide to kind of figure out what was going on. So in one of the spots I fish, the outgoing tide is completely normal, but the incoming tide is kind of bizarre. So when the tide's coming in, it's coming in from both of these sides. When I'm fishing there, what I see from my point of view when I'm on the beach, the tide comes in for an hour when it's scheduled, and then it turns around and goes back out for an hour, and then it turns around and comes in for the rest of the incoming tide before resuming a normal outgoing tide. So the first time I saw that, I kind of had no idea what was going on, but then I looked at the map of the region and it made sense. So as this whole area is filling out, the other side of the river is much larger than the side that I'm fishing, on the other side of the island. So as water's coming in from both sides, there's far more water coming in on this side. And they're both coming in together, but at certain stages of the tide, when the water moves harder, because there's so much more on this side, it actually overpowers it and creates like a flow that comes all the way around. So the water will come in on this side and fill up everything. Remember, high and low tide refers to the region as a whole, not any individual spot. So as this whole area is filling up, the water appears to be coming in here, and then appears to be going out, when in fact it's still rising the entire time. It's just the direction it's coming from is different. But the way this can throw you off is you're used to, or I was used to, the ocean's here, upriver's there. High tide must mean the water's moving this way, and low tide must mean it's moving that way. So by looking at the direction that the current's flowing, that's how it threw me off. But after looking at the map, I understand why that is. So if you're experiencing some tidal anomalies, looking at a map can sometimes help make sense of them. The second one is when you have like a back bay area. And this particular back bay has a large estuary behind it. Like it really expands out. There's a bay and then there's little inlets that come off of it. There's a lot of water back there. So this one, the outgoing tide is totally normal, but it's actually extended. So the way it works is the tide will come in, the back bay will fill up, and then the tide will drop. But because it's being funneled through this one little tiny area right here, in this particular spot, it's maybe 10 feet wide, where all of this has to go through. Because of that, as this water is draining at the normal rate, the region, this can't keep up. So when this is dead low, this current's still ripping pretty hard over here. And even to the point where this will start to come back in, the water's filling up in here again, this is still draining until the water levels balance again. So that can definitely throw you off as well. So now that we've explored a couple of these anomalies, how do we plan our fishing trips around them? So sometimes it may seem easy, like the back bay situation here. If we still have water coming out there, and by the way, this will actually, even though the tide's coming in, this outflow will probably stretch still about 100 feet into the river. And as it goes into the river, we'll say it's around here. There's structure here that I fish on an outgoing tide, that I will still catch fish on when this is pouring out during an incoming tide. And I know that because I went there and I fished it. And that's why I recommend keeping a fishing journal. I have another video on that, so definitely check that out if you're interested. But that's how you're going to learn how this stuff works. So now when I look at the tide chart and I see low tides at 7 o'clock, I know I can show up here at 7 o'clock if I'm working late and I don't have time to get there earlier. I know I can still go there and expect to catch fish until 8:30 because that's how that spot works. On an incoming tide, this is still going out. So the other section of water where the tide reverses and then goes back out, from keeping a journal and fishing there over the years, I've learned that the better bite on that spot is on an incoming tide. This is where it can get a little confusing actually, because oftentimes, like this showed, the bite coincides with the direction that the water is moving. So let's say we have our structure here, and then the water is moving past it. Usually with structure, depending on where you're fishing, but oftentimes the way the structure is set up, the fish will have a feeding advantage when the water is moving in one direction and not so much in the other direction. So in that particular area, the bite is on the incoming tide because the water is moving against the structure in a way that gives the striped bass a feeding advantage. So that's when they feed. Now, during that incoming tide, when the water turns around and moves the other direction, the bite dies because it has nothing to do with necessarily the fact that the water is rising. It has to do with the direction the water is moving over the current. So from keeping a journal, I know in that spot, if I want to fish there, I need to show up either as soon as the tide turns or 3 hours after, once that whole weird cycle has taken place and it resumes back to the incoming tide. Tide refers to the region as a whole. The individual areas, the water flow, the way the current works, it's not always going to do what you think it should be doing on that stage of the tide or what you may expect. Learning how your region works comes from experience, but you'll learn much faster if you keep track of it as you go, because then you can reference and say, okay, I want to fish the outgoing tide here. Outgoing tide is at 5:30 p.m., but I know that water doesn't move the way I need it to be moving until 7:30. So you'll save yourself some time as well. Subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.